Shabbat Shalom. I want to give you all credit. Hopefully you're all coming back tonight for the prom and you're here this morning. So this is just a big Beth El day. We're looking forward to a wonderful celebration tonight that Kevin will tell you a little more about later. I returned yesterday morning from a very quick trip to Israel. I was selected as one of 20 rabbis in the conservative movement from the Rabbinical Assembly as part of a cohort to participate in a program that was called Leading Across Difference Challenge, navigating the challenges of Israel conversations in our communities. And it was with the program called Encounter. Encounter began in 2006, primarily aimed at bringing American rabbinical students to the West Bank to have conversations with Palestinians. A few years ago, they pivoted their mission, really focusing primarily on bringing Israelis, Israel leaders and cultural leaders, not political leaders, but cultural and educational leaders within Israel together. And what ends up happening is that they, of course, share stories amongst each other. And there are many segments of Israeli society that are divided into different moral tribes, to use one of the terms out there. And then also bringing them to hear Palestinian voices. Many of the Israeli participants, it is their very first time having a conversation with Palestinians. One of the Israelis who presented to us told us of how bizarre it was for him because they did a trip, this was before October 7th, did a trip into Bethlehem, and where the Palestinian Authority security services were providing security for their group. And the only time that he had been in the West Bank was when he was in an army uniform. And so for him to be there where the Palestinians were providing security for him was a very different experience. Our group spent the first day and a half listening to different Israeli voices. Some people who live in settlements, some who have been deeply involved in the peace activism and movements, and then spent the second few days listening to different Palestinian voices going into the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And we also had one evening, a beautiful evening, where we heard the Jerusalem Youth Chorus, which if you watch America's Got Talent, you know that they were on America's Got Talent, and they gave a beautiful performance and also shared some wonderful stories. I have not yet, in the 24 hours, 30 hours that I've been home, had time to process and sort of share more stories, and I'm sure I will do that in the coming weeks. I'll just say very briefly, I also had a chance to see Noah Bierman, who is in Israel, and visit with her. She's doing very difficult work called Protective Presence, and I had a chance to see my teacher, Reb Mimi Feigelson. If you follow on social media, I had a wonderful encounter with her at Eucalyptus. I want to just turn for a moment to look at two verses from the Torah this morning that may shed some light on some of the things that we looked at and that we encountered over the last 4 days. If you look, you can take out your Chumashim if you want. Otherwise, I'll just read them to you. It's just two verses, chapter 23, verses 4 and 5. It's on page 471. The Torah says, Ki tifga shor oyivcha o chamoro to'eh. And by the way, I'm going to read these two verses together because the Italian 19th century commentator Shmuel David Luzzatto, in his commentary, he explains these two verses as a unit and that they're really speaking to each other. The first one says, Ki tifga shor oyivcha o chamoro to'eh. When you tifga, pogea sometimes can mean to like bump into, when you encounter, when you meet. The ox of oyivcha, of your enemy. It's the word for enemy. O chamoro to'eh, or his donkey, to'eh, wandering. Presumably it's lost its owner, or its owner lost it. Hashev tishibenu lo. You must return it. You shall surely return it to him. Okay? And there are other mitzvahs, by the way, in the Torah, Hashavat Avedah, that we have an obligation to return all lost objects, but the Torah is calling our attention specifically to the ox or the donkey, which the Chazal say really means any object, right, of your enemy. Then the second verse, Ki tir'eh chamor sona'acha rovetz tachat masa'o. When you see the donkey of one who, one translation read it as one who you hate. Most of the translations read it as one who hates you. And it is struggling, rovates, it's crouching underneath masa, its burden. Okay, so you can imagine a donkey with a load on it, and it's struggling under its burden. V'chadalta me'azovlo. And Rashi, this is a very confusing verse, but Rashi says, read the first key at the beginning of this verse as a question word, right? He actually says even bitmiha, which is the Torah is sort of saying, as if you are astonished. Is it possible that you could see the donkey of your enemy lying under its burden, v'chadalta me'azovlo, and you would refrain from helping it? Azov to azovimo. No, help, and la'azov, there's a whole thing here, probably means something like unburden the donkey from its burden with him. Okay. The Gemara, by the way, says if the guy who hates you is just standing there and not willing to help you, right? You actually don't have to. You don't have an obligation to do it all by yourself, right? But if he's not there, or he is willing to do it with you, then you need to join together and relieve the burden. Okay, and Shadal reads these two verses as follows. First of all, he says that the enemy in verse 1 is stronger than the sona'acha, than the one who hates you. Okay, that it's more severe, and for that reason, in some ways the verse is more intimate. Ki tifka, when you run into, you may have actually bumped into this animal, but it's right there next to you. But it's also more distant because Shadal says, this person is your enemy. You're not obligated to endanger yourself by bringing it back to your enemy. You're allowed to send it by way of messengers. Right? In other words, you still have an obligation to your enemy. You still have an obligation to the property of your enemy, but you actually do not have to endanger yourself in order to fulfill this obligation, right? And that obligation kicks in not everywhere, but when you bump into the animal, right? When you encounter it. As opposed to the second verse, which says, ki tir'eh, when you see, that might be from a distance. If you see someone who hates you and their animal struggling from a distance, if they enter into your field of vision, then you have an obligation. Your obligation kicks in, not just when you bump into them in the most intimate way, but even from a distance, from what you see. Then you have an obligation. By the way, Shadal also says returning the animal to its owner could take several days, right? It could be a whole process, but this is a momentary thing, right? Which is you have an obligation, stop. You have an obligation to walk over to what you see. Maybe it's a couple hundred meters, maybe it's a half a kilometer, right? And to help with that person, right? Presumably they hate you. Presumably, according to his reading, you are not endangering yourself, but it's also not a fun moment. And the Gemara actually says that the Torah, in commanding you not to refrain from helping, is speaking to two things. Number one, there is a general mitzvah in Judaism of tsar ba'alei chayim, to prevent the suffering of animals. So the suffering of that animal crouching beneath its burden places a claim upon you. Rabbi David Hartman, alav shalom, who was a teacher of mine, teacher of Rabbi Stagers, would often describe that we want to create Jews who are totally free and totally claimed. That we should walk through the world claimed by an animal that we bump into, claimed by the things which we see, which come into our field of vision. The suffering of that animal claims us. It requires of us to go and to help the animal. And the Gemara says, and Luzzatto in his commentary says, maybe by way, the Gemara says, why is the Torah requiring this to you? To help you overcome your yetzer hara, your evil inclination, because your evil inclination is exactly what the Torah describes. That person hates me. I'm not helping them. But the Torah is saying, no, you have to help. Maybe because it's tsar ba'alei chayim, maybe because the suffering of the animal claims you, and maybe because even though that person hates you, you still have an obligation to them. And Luzzatto says that maybe by way of coming up and working together, you might come lahashlim ito, you might come to make peace. That if we have a collective project of reducing suffering in the world, then we might come by way of peace. I didn't return from Israel with answers. There is so much pain. There are real enemies. And there's real danger. And there's hatred. But there's also a requirement to help and the possibility always for peace. I'll finish two quick thoughts. Number one, something that over and over again among both the Israelis and the Palestinians that came to, that came to the surface was, for me, open, closed, open. That before October 7th, we were meeting with a group of people who had done this sort of encounter and been open to the possibility of hearing the pain of the other. And October 7th, and this is not a sin, it's human. People talked about becoming closed because it was too painful. And there's starting to begin to be an opening. A last little story. You may have seen this on Facebook. I'm in a restaurant, literally an hour before going to the airport, and I'm walking out, and across the table, I see a familiar face, and I said to the woman at the table, "Excuse me, are you Sarah?" And she said, "Yes, I am." It was Sarah Tuttle Singer, who is a columnist for the Times of Israel. And I said, "I just want to tell you your writing is beautiful." And she said, "Thank you." I said, "I don't want to disturb." I started to walk away, and then I turned around and I came back and I said, "I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to tell you something. Your words, in our congregation, we've prayed for the hostages for so long. And along with the prayer for the hostages, we read your words because they meant a tremendous amount to many, many people in our congregation and in our community. And she started to tear up and to be grateful. And I want to just finish with her words, which though we have stopped to say them and to stop the prayers for the hostages, thank God, who are home, these words still carry much wisdom. She says, "We are all made of the same flesh, all of us, dust and blood and breath. We forget this at our peril. So while I pray for our soldiers, these precious beloved sons and daughters and brothers and sisters and partners of my friends and neighbors, and while I pray for the safe return of every last hostage, and while I beg God to protect my own children from the call to battle, I also pray for the mothers in Gaza, for the ones who still live, for the ones who don't, for the children caught between terror and siege, between monsters below ground and bombs above. I grieve all of it, and I rage at all of it, and I refuse to flatten any of it, because to be human is to hold contradiction, to love your own fiercely, to weep for the other, to fight when you must, and to see clearly even through your tears. I am a mother in Israel, and I am trying desperately to stay whole, to keep my heart from cracking entirely open, to believe that somehow from this horror something better might still grow, that maybe one day our children's children will not need to be brave. They will just get to be children. And let us say, Amen.